Good evening. My name is Pete Peterson, and I am the Dean of Pepperdine School of Public Policy, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be back here tonight talking about friendship. Though I realized as I was preparing my remarks, both this town and the place where I'm from are not known as being particularly friendly places. I know you all know that great Truman quote, that if you want a friend in this town, you should get a dog. But where I come from in Los Angeles and Hollywood, we also are not known for our friendliness. The late Carrie Fisher once said, "You can't find any true closeness in Hollywood because everyone does fake closeness so well." So a question could be asked, why would a graduate policy school care about something like friendship? And that's really because, as I know I've mentioned on this podium many times, the Graduate Policy School was founded by a rather unique social science researcher and policymaker, the late James Q. Wilson. It was Wilson who founded our school, designed our unique curriculum that balances the quantitative coursework that you'll find in a lot of graduate policy schools, but with things that you just can't measure: history, philosophy, and friendship. In fact, Dr. Wilson founded the school within a couple years of writing what many consider to be his great opus work, The Moral Sense. I bring my jacket copy here that all Pepperdine graduates have. And I just wanted to read a short passage here from the very first page of the preface, which indicates in many ways that though Wilson is seen as a very hardened social science researcher, he understood later in life that it was the things in between the numbers, relationships and friendships, that really could dictate whether a policy succeeded or failed. He wrote this to begin the book: "Virtue has acquired a bad name, yet the daily discourse of ordinary people is filled with oblique references to morality. We talk constantly about being or not being decent, nice, or dependable, about having or not having good character, about friendship, loyalty, and moderation, or fickleness, insincerity, and addiction. When we overhear these conversations or read about these topics in magazines and novels, we sometimes say that people are preoccupied with personal relationships, the problems of mother and child, or wife and husband, of lovers, friends, and coworkers. This preoccupation is not simply about relationships, however. Much of it is about what those relationships ought to be. This preoccupation, like the adjectives with which we express it, loyal, kind, or nice, disloyal, selfish, or rude, is with the language of morality, even though we often disguise it in the language of personality. It is the language of virtue and vice. It is the language that this book is about." That's why we care about friendship, because we know that policy is not just what drops out the bottom of an Excel spreadsheet that says policy A is going to be better than policy B. Because we're not talking about policy, we're talking about public policy. And the difference between policy and public policy is when somebody takes a good quantitative idea and matches it with good relationships and an understanding of what the public will stand. So that's why we're so honored again to be a co-host of this evening tonight, a night that celebrates friendship. And so without any further ado, let me welcome up my friend, Cherie Harder.
Well, thank you, Pete, for that kind introduction, and welcome to all of you to tonight's evening conversation on faithful friendship amidst difference. As Pete noted, this is part of our ongoing series that Trinity Forum has partnered with the Pepperdine School of Public Policy to host. As part of this series, we've tackled topics as diverse as reforming public theology, the role of friendship in the political imagination, the endangered future of liberal democracy, the strange persistence of guilt in a post-religious world, and other light topics. We're grateful for Pepperdine's partnership and support in convening discussions like these, and Pete, we are grateful for your friendship as well. In addition to recognizing our co-hosts, and along with Brian Swartz from Pepperdine, who's here, as well as Pete Peterson, I'd like to recognize just a few special guests. We're delighted that the founder of the Trinity Forum, Oz Guinness, has joined us this evening. So glad you're with us, Oz, as well as trustee Shirley Hoogstra. We're also delighted that every one of you is here. We know this was convened fairly short notice, that the traffic was terrible, the weather is often bad, and so if you had friends who wanted to be here tonight but couldn't make it, fear not. We are live streaming this event. We are also recording it via video. We'll have the video up on our website, and we're live streaming even as we speak on both our Facebook channels and our YouTube channels. It's a pleasure to see so many new faces tonight. I know there are several people here who are here for the very first time. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Trinity Forum, we worked to create a space for the discussion of life's greatest questions in the context of faith. And we do this both by providing readings and publications which draw upon classic works of literature and letters that explore enduring questions and connect the timeless wisdom of the humanities with timely issues of the day, as well as sponsoring programs such as this one tonight, to connect leading thinkers with thinking leaders in engaging those big questions of life, and ultimately coming to better know the author of the answers. As we've noted in virtually every evening conversation before, it's been said that the big questions of life distill down to basically three. What is a good person? What is the good life? And what is the just society? And tonight, what we'll be discussing is foundational and formational to all three such questions. In classical texts, friendship was often viewed as the highest state of happiness and human fulfillment, the good life. The Bible has much to say about the power of friendship in forming good character and the good person. But friendship is essential not only to good character and the good life, but also to preserving a free and just society as a whole. During the course of this year, those of you who have been to our other evening conversations have heard from a number of provocative speakers who have asserted that our growing estrangement from each other does not merely depress, demoralize, and deplete us on an individual level, but actually poses an urgent challenge to the state of our republic. From Senator Ben Sasse, who we hosted just a few weeks ago, who claims that we are in the midst of a crisis of loneliness, to political scientist Francis Fukuyama, who described the isolating impact of the increasing politicization of our sense of identity, to the discussion between David Brooks and Patrick Deneen, which we hosted with Pepperdine just a few months ago, which described the ways in which the erosion of relational bonds threatens the very fabric of our republic. The state of friendship in America often illuminates the state of our union itself. And by such light and illumination, we may have reason to be concerned. So how do we, both individually and corporately, rebuild those relational bonds that have undergirded our country? How do we learn to live with, work alongside, look out for, even love those with whom we disagree? Or more simply and personally, in a lonely and angry world, how do we learn to better love our neighbor or be a better friend? It's a vitally important question as well as a challenging one, and we are delighted and honored to hear tonight from a couple of friends who are creatively and courageously seeking to live out the answer, even amidst the weaponized difference, bruising realities, and bloated egos that characterize the political arena. Tonight we're going to hear from Senator Tim Scott and Trey Gowdy, or Congressman Trey Gowdy. Senator Scott is a small businessman who served as the junior senator from South Carolina since 2013. In addition to owning an insurance agency and working as a financial advisor, he previously served on the Charleston City Council for 13 years before being elected to the House of Representatives in 2010. A mere 3 years later, he was appointed by then-Governor Nikki Haley to replace retiring Senator Jim DeMint, then later won both a special election in 2014 as well as a general election in 2016. And he serves now as the first African-American senator from the state of South Carolina and the first African-American in the country to be elected both the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate since Reconstruction. He serves on the Senate Finance Committee, the Senate Help Committee, the Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship, and others. Having grown up in a poor and single-parent household, he has made it a life mission to positively affect the lives of 1 billion people through the message of hope and opportunity. Joining him tonight is Congressman Trey Gowdy, who is the U.S. Representative for South Carolina's 4th District. A former state and federal prosecutor, he twice received the highest performance rating a federal prosecutor can secure. As a 7th Circuit solicitor, he started a Violence Against Women task force, expanded drug courts, and created and implemented a program to help expectant mothers break free from the cycle of addiction. In 2010, along with his friend Senator Scott, he was elected to Congress and is now in his 4th term. From 2014 to 2016, he's chaired the House Select Committee on events surrounding the 2012 terrorist attack in Benghazi. Last year, became the chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, as well as serving on committees for intelligence and the Judiciary Committee. Earlier this year, Congressman Gowdy announced he would not seek re-election and intends to soon return to practicing law. In their spare time, Senator Scott and Congressman Gowdy have co-written the New York Times bestseller, Unified: How Our Unlikely Friendship Gives Us Hope for a Divided Country, and describes the genesis of their own friendship and the potential it shows for cultivating harmony amidst diversity and reconciliation amidst difference. After both Congressman Gowdy and Senator Scott give opening remarks, we'll have a brief moderated conversation between them, followed by questions from the audience. Congressman Gowdy, the floor is yours.
I'm going to go first because if you've been in D.C. long, you know if a senator gets a microphone, we may be here for a little while. So a lot of folks assume, because Timmy and I are from the same state, that we knew each other. I had no idea who he was until orientation. The only intersection our lives had was he called me, said, I'm going to be at Wofford College. He was a candidate for lieutenant governor in the state of South Carolina at the time. And he said, I'm going to be in Wofford. That's in Spartanburg. If you have a chance, I want you to come out and we'll meet. Well, of all the things in the world I wanted to do that night, going to listen to a lieutenant governor's debate was like 112. So I didn't go. But I read the paper the next day, and lo and behold, Lieutenant Governor candidate Tim Scott was a no-show for the debate. Didn't even come. I thought, oh, this guy's got a really bright political future. Doesn't even go to the debate. One day later, I figured out why. He was not going to run for lieutenant governor. He was going to run for the United States House of Representatives, where he beat, among other people, the son of Carroll Campbell, who was a beloved governor in our state, and the son of Strom Thurmond, who was legendary. And he beat a whole host of other folks. We met in orientation. He was the Elvis Presley of our historically large freshman class. We had Kristi Noem, and we had Sean Duffy, and we had Alan West. We had a lot of famous people, but Tim Scott was far and away the best known, the most popular, the most beloved member of our freshman class. We met. We were having dinner one night, and Tim said, I want to do something that will shock the world. I said, okay. He said, I want to write a book. I said, well, Tim, it would shock the world if we read a book. Why would we want to put the time and effort into writing one? And he said, I want to write one. And if you're not familiar with his life narrative, how he grew up and the circumstances over which he rose, that is the book I wanted him to write. I wanted him to literally write the book from cotton to Congress, because his grandfather, Mr. Artemus Ware, picked cotton. never learned to read, but was going to have a grandson that could. And that grandson, because of the power and the magic of education, went from a family that picked cotton to a family that picked out a seat in the United States House. That's the book I wanted him to write. Unbeknownst to me, he's too modest, then doesn't have sufficient ego to write a book about himself, so he said, let's write a book. He's a unicorn among my peers, but he did not want to write a book about himself. So we wrote a book about unity, and I guess, simply put, this is why. We both enjoy contrast. Contrast is what you would expect and is what you need in a functioning, pluralistic republic. Conflict, which is what we have now, is debilitating, it is destructive, it is what leads to the political environment that I will soon be leaving, but thank the Lord, he is willing to stay in. I think the poll that caught my attention the most, 2/3 of all Republicans do not have a Democrat friend, and 2/3 of all Democrats do not have a Republican friend. And I contrast that with my own household, where I live with a 21-year-old socialist. Let me be very, very clear, that is our daughter and not my wife. My wife may look 21, but she is not 21, and she is not a socialist. That would be our daughter, whom I love more than anything in the world. And to have to endure a nightly conversation about why marijuana should be legalized is a very small price to pay to have a relationship with somebody that you care about. So we wanted to write a book explaining you can have all the differences, and I get it. When we were on our book tour, the media said, well, you guys are both from South Carolina, you're both Republicans. What in the world could you possibly not have in common? So number one, I want to celebrate the fact that a black guy and a white guy from South Carolina could be asked, what could you guys possibly not have in common? Because that is progress in the state that we come from. But the reality is we've had different experiences with law enforcement. I've never been stopped except that I deserve to be stopped. He was stopped 7 times as an elected official. When you look at the two of us, who is most likely to present a threat to society? Everyone would pick me. But I'm not the one getting stopped. I don't wear a member pin. I don't wear a U.S. House pin. I've never been denied egress to a Capitol building. He wears a Senate pin. He's been physically stopped twice. So I need his perspective on law enforcement. We have different views on education. There's not a greater champion for school choice in the world than him, and there's not a night I want to sleep on the couch, and I'm married to a first-grade public school teacher. So we do have differences, but the friendship, I knew you'd get it eventually. The friendship is intentional. And so what we would like people to do is be intentional in seeking out a relationship with someone either of a different faith or a different political persuasion. Timmy and I have this line, it is impossible to hate something that you know. And that is true in our own lives. The very first 2 texts I got when I said I wasn't leaving, it wasn't from Paul and Kevin. They were in the top 20. It was from Tulsi Gabbard and Kirsten Sinema. You won't find 2 more progressive people in the House. But to be able to have a relationship despite the fact that we never vote the same. If we can do it, then I would encourage my fellow citizens to do it, and it's not that hard, and that's why we wrote the book. With that, the very best person in all of politics, who also happens to be my senator, Tim Scott.
Everybody doing okay? Now, Trey, I want to just thank you for having a hairstyle tonight that we can really appreciate. Can you just stand up and let everybody take one look at when
You're really going to ask me about hair?
Yeah.
Wow.
Noted, without any question. There's sometimes when he comes in And I'm just, wow. I said, Trey, you took 20 minutes to do that? He was like, 25 minutes to do that. I'm like, wow, that's a miracle, without any question. So Trey and I do come from the same state. We have a lot in common, but the reality of it is that our experiences were very different growing up. And one of the reasons why I thank the good Lord that we were able to write this book and talk about how folks from different backgrounds can have a chance to have an experience, a relationship that is powerful, that is transformative, is because in our state, when we were growing up, we would not have been able to play together. We certainly couldn't go to the same restaurant, stay at the same hotel, or spend really any quality time together. So that foundation really frames how we see the world. He grew up in the house with a doctor and a loving mom. I had a single mom who worked 16 hours a day in the hospital, but as a nurse's aide. So she basically turned patients over and cleaned bedpans. And she did that for hours upon hours and days upon days. And so my perspective, my worldview was framed by a person who invested so much of her life in making sure that both of her sons could grow up and see a different world. And so there's dignity in all work, and that was one of the shared experiences. Trey graduated cum laude. I graduated thank you laude. So there's a lot of differences. When I was in high school, I was flunked. I am probably the first United States senator to ever fail out of high school. I failed out as a freshman. I failed world geography. I know I'm the first United States senator to fail civics. Now, I will say after 5 years in the U.S. Senate, I'm confident that I'm not the only one who fails civics. We need a whole lot of help in the United States Senate. I also failed Spanish and English. So if you fail Spanish and English, no one calls you bilingual. They all call you by ignorant because you can't speak any language. That's where I came from. Trey, as he has told me a few times, grew up reading the dictionary or the encyclopedia. He had choice. Literally, one of the things I love about Trey Gowdy is that he is a person who harnesses the English language and can literally rip the skin off of you as he cross-examines you. And it's a powerful gift. But what made me want to write this book with Trey was lunch after lunch, and mostly dinner after dinner for about 5 years. I'm a believer that God is a genius, and that he begins at the end and works his way back. Proverbs 27:17, as iron sharpens iron, so one man does the other. I did not know that for 5 years, probably 3 nights a week, for 42 to 44 weeks a year, the Lord was preparing the soil for a friendship that would have to go through the fire of a church massacre where 9 African Americans would lose their lives because a racist would walk into the church, sit through a Bible study, and then execute 9 believers. And for me, to turn to a white guy from the same state minutes after I received the phone call that my friend, who was the pastor of that church, Clemente Pinckney, and 8 parishioners were gone, a church where my uncle attended for over 50 years. For the first person that I turned to after a racially motivated massacre was Trey Gowdy. And it took me 3 or 4 weeks before I was able to reflect back at the power of love and the power of transformation to change my world and our world, so much so that the most natural thing for me to do was to call Trey. And if that is possible in a city not known for friendship, all things are truly possible. And if we would spend more time breaking bread, perhaps we would discover the kernels of truth that we are all so similar. And we may disagree in areas, but fundamentally, we really want the same things. And so a part of the blessing that God has given me is a strong, clear thinker whose first response in the midst of a crisis is, tell me what I can do to serve you. That will change your life. It certainly changed mine. And I'm thankful that God planted the seed and gave it 5 years to germinate so that when the harvest was necessary, it was plentiful. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that, Senator Scott and Congressman Gowdy. You ended with a story of Charleston. Really, the first question I wanted to ask was a question you posed in the book, Congressman, which is, why does it take a calamity to lead us towards reconciliation?
Well, if I knew the answer, I would not have posed the question. I don't know why you're looking at me. I don't know, but we see it time and time again in our country. It takes a 9/11. It takes a natural disaster. For the life of me, now I want to be fair. In South Carolina, the remnants of that unity and the relationships you build do last, and they are there on the precipice of the next disaster. But collectively, what alarms me is that it requires a calamity, a tragedy, and what alarms me perhaps even more is that period of unity is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. It is sometimes within 24 hours of a mass shooting, of something, we begin to run towards whatever part of the conversation is most divisive. I'm not a huge fan of the nature of man. As Tim knows, he's an optimist. I am not, so I'm never disappointed and rarely surprised. So I don't know.
Amen, brother, amen.
I don't know why, but I know that we need to find a way to capture the unity the day before the shooting and not the day after.
From my perspective, I am hopeful and optimistic about the fact that constantly and continuously the aftermath mentality seems to be alive and well. That the aftermath mentality where we're able to come together in spite of our differences is something that can be harnessed, and hopefully we can figure out the key components to the aftermath mentality without the crisis. One of the ways that I have seen that work is not only through our friendship, certainly, spending that much time together, as Trey said when he was talking. It mentioned the quote that it's hard to hate what you know. Part of the aftermath mentality is that we drop all of the walls that separate us into, whether it's identity politics or whether it's the black race or the white race or whether you're poor or rich. We find ourselves rushing, not to the middle, but rushing towards love, rushing towards acceptance, because we are insulated by that gift, the gift of love. And if we're able to find that before the crisis, I think we'll actually start preventing crisis.
So both of you mentioned, both in your book and touched on it in your remarks, drawing a difference between contrast and conflict, and aiming towards contrast with an eye towards conciliation, but away from conflict. But you are both in an industry where conflict, rather than contrast, is rewarded. By virtually any measure, whether it's votes or attention or money, drawing sharp and even nasty distinctions and stoking conflict is what's often rewarded. So in politics, how do you win by aiming towards conciliation rather than conflict?
Well, you want me to go first on every?
Okay, I'll take this one then.
That'll give me a chance to think.
Well, you're so good at thinking, though. You hear the whole conversation I had about you reading the encyclopedia and the dictionary. Did you miss that part?
That was because I had a mean dad. That wasn't because I liked to do it.
Well, I thank your dad that you did it. So from my perspective, the way you win is by, I owned a couple of companies around selling. And to me, it's really about motivating and not manipulating. So often in this town and throughout politics, you're rewarded because you can monetize the separation. You can monetize the division because we've learned how to monetize it, it is simply the easiest common denominator for progress. A harder but healthier approach is motivating people in their best interest. If we can start with the end in mind, it's easier for us to overcome that. Some of the legislative victories that I've seen in my career in the last 5 years has come from the ability to sell people on what is in our long-term best interest. And whether it's the tax code or the opportunity zones, or today we passed the sickle cell legislation, there are so many victories we've had in the last 2 years because we've been able to cobble together people who are interested in the same thing, point us in the same direction, and get a result without having to find a way to fight against the other side. I think that politics should be about adding, the game of addition, and so far we've been able to succeed by having an agenda that is focused on the greater good. And as Pollyanna as it seems, we've had more legislative victories in the last year of Obama's term and these first 2 years than I've had in 20 years.
Congressman?
I think we have to, as a culture, find a way to reject the relativism that has crept in, this rationalization that the end justifies the means. That's never been true in any other facet of life. I'm a golfer, which is one of the few sports where you actually call the penalty on yourself, where no one else can see it. In politics, the objective is to win. And if that means I have to say something that's not true about an opponent, we have convinced ourselves that the fate of mankind depends upon whether or not my party is in power, therefore whatever I do is justified. And also, I don't know how many folks in the room are believers other than my scheduler and Tim. I think I know their hearts. But every hero I have had has lost. In the traditional sense, Dietrich Bonhoeffer executed, Martin Luther King assassinated, went to prison. Jesus lost a voice vote to a guy named Barabbas. There are worse things than losing, but in politics, we don't embrace that. I won't call any names, but Tim, you'll know the race I'm talking about. There was a runoff in South Carolina, and I watched someone who had a certain reputation for 40 years of his life become something he was not in a runoff. There is no race, there is no office that should be worth that. There's just none. And until we say I'd rather lose than become something I'm not, I've run one negative ad in my career, and it was against myself. I made fun of my hair. Last cycle.
And it was
I
funny.
did.
It was
worked.
really funny.
Yeah,
You
it
should look
worked.
it up.
I barely beat none of the above. And if you purport to hold a set of values and it's not reflected in how you run your race, then it makes me wonder how deeply you hold those values. I've never seen a negative ad come. If you've ever run one, I've never seen it. He won't even defend himself. When people attack him, I got to jeopardize my own salvation to jump into it because he practices his religious beliefs. The only belief I really see in politics now is just we got to win.
Let me go back to something you said, Senator, which is the difference between our darker instincts, which are so easily monetized, and the better angels of our nature, which takes so much more work to cultivate. And you see, of course, that playing out really in so many spheres, not just politics. Yep. We all long for true love, and yet it's porn that's a multi-billion-dollar industry. You know, it's much easier to both weaponize and monetize the darker instincts. And Trey, one of the things you said in the book, which was, I'll quote, "With the possible exception of love, TV is the most powerful force on the planet." As people who work in politics, TV and love pull you in very different directions. Acting for the cameras pulls you in a very different direction than working towards conciliation and personal relationships. What advice or practices do you engage in to essentially kind of order your priorities and your loves so that your practice is in line with the highest and best as opposed to the most advantageous or practical?
It's hard, which is, and I'm not saying that I've always pulled it off. Television, people want to be entertained. And they may agree we're too conflicted, but they want to see it. And sometimes the personalities that make it to television at night are the most extreme personalities. I don't know how many people here know who Phil Rowe is. I don't think anybody knows who Phil Rowe is. Maybe some of them do. But I could call the names of some of my colleagues, and they'd all know who they were. So we reward it. You can become famous. I won't name names, although I can. I'm leaving. If you want to become well-known quickly, you know, I remember Paul, not the Apostle Paul, Paul Ryan, talking about slowly building your credibility, slowly building your reputation, or you can be known in about 6 weeks by just being overtly provocative. I don't know whether to blame us collectively for having an appetite for it, or I think politicians reflect culture as opposed to lead it. I think we are a lagging indicator of where the culture is. And if the culture wants that kind of gladiator type mentality, the other thing that just drives me nuts are the debates to be the leader of the free world. We're going to give you a minute to answer a question. And we've accepted that, okay, well, I hope Tim can squeeze his tax plan in the minute. But our attention spans are so small, we might not give him more than a minute to tell us what his jobs plan is. So it's this intersection of entertainment and politics and a market for the combat that has led to the current state of television.
You have more than a minute.
Well, thank you very much. That's great. Well, I'd start off by reflecting on the importance of distilling love down to some basic components. Perhaps perusing through 1 Corinthians 13 for a little while would be an important engagement. And not simply seeing love and TV as polarizing challenges, but perhaps leveraging TV for the cause that you love. Perhaps a great example of that is what Trey Gowdy has done over his career. You will not find Trey Gowdy on TV talking about economic policy.
No, not unless they slipped in a question they didn't warn me about, no.
But what you will find him talking about and engaging on TV is around issues of the law, the justice system, about investigations, because in his heart, Trey Gowdy is still a prosecutor. He's driven not as a prosecutor, he's driven as a man who has a passion and a love for justice and for truth and for clarity. Because of that, he's able to leverage TV to put on display a passionate pursuit of something he truly loves. One of the reasons why he's so good on TV, because it's authentic. Now, some people are really good so they can fake authenticity, but he doesn't. And I think that's part of the challenge that we have as people of faith and people of character, is to figure out how to use the resources that we have, to include mass media, in a way of starting a new conversation, a new debate about the good that we should be doing and how to get it done. And stay in your lane. I'm a salesman, I'm a business owner. I enjoy selling and marketing. I like numbers. I like to talk about economic policy. I'm not a lawyer. I have no idea what he's talking about sometimes. So when I need legal expertise, I turn to Trey and allow him to feed me the necessary information to have a conversation about something I don't know about. As a United States Senator, I've been given the distinct responsibility and privilege of choosing judges and appointments. My chief counsel doesn't work for me. It's Trey Gowdy. Because he has a worldview and 25 years of experience that informs and educates me in an area that I don't love, but it's still my responsibility. I've gotten better at my work, but it's because I've had a great teacher. So learn to use what you have, which is mass media, to serve what you love, as opposed to serving mass media, which is a line of delineation that sometimes we confuse.
So we're titling this discussion Faithful Friendship Amidst Difference. What role does your shared faith play in either the formation or the sustenance of your friendship?
Well, y'all might not have picked up on this yet, but I'm a cynical person, and I have no defense for an authentically lived life. I can't rationalize my way out of it, and I've been blessed that I live with the most Christ-like person that I have ever met in my life. I've got a scheduler that would be the number 2 most Christ-like person. This guy, there's a verse, he'll know where it is, but I know it's a verse. To work out your salvation with fear and trembling. And that's also a book by Kierkegaard, but it's a verse. And so in my mind, I am constantly trying to work out. I think we believe the same things, but our view of mankind could not be more different. I am not an optimist. I'm a skeptic and a cynic. And that leads to certain slew of despond from time to time. He mentioned the shooting in Charleston. His reaction to the shooting did more to enhance my faith. I was not aggrieved. I'm not black. I'm not from Charleston. And I'm sitting there thinking, just like Habakkuk asked God, how could you possibly let this happen? You could have found 1,000,000 other ways to get your point across. Why did you let this happen? But it was his reaction to the shooting and that of the victims who looked Dylan Roof in the eyes and said, we forgive you. It is really other people's faith that enhances mine, and I'm just blessed that I get to spend time around someone who's actually better in private than he is in public, if that's possible.
His faith has made my faith stronger because Trey, in his essence, is inquisitive. So if you talk to Trey about, looking at it from the cynic's perspective that John 10:10 talks about, that there's a thief that comes to kill, steal, and destroy, I'm on the other side, that there's this guy coming to bring life and more abundance. Trey will spend an hour asking questions and probing what it means to have someone steal, kill, and destroy. I'll move on to say, Trey, you're seeing it wrong. God also didn't give us the spirit of fear. He gives us power, love, and a sound mind. And he'll say, well, talk to me about the development of your mind. And he'll take me down a historical path. I'm like, what had happened was, and so what I find is that my faith has been strengthened by the conflict and the challenges and the pain and the misery of my life. I have found that God never fails. I have found that ultimately things work out for my good. What Trey helps me to do is to ask better questions along the way so that perhaps I get there faster. Because I'm a slow learner. And Trey, because of his foundational questions about faith, about history, about literature, and about the meaning of words, challenges me to take a second look. And if I stray too far in his direction, then he finds this hopeful cynic arises and draws me back to my side of the aisle. And so it's an amazing journey to have someone who can challenge your faith and You can listen to him if you want to, and don't believe the hype that he doesn't know Scripture. He knows not only the chapter and verse, well, not always, but he knows it pretty well. He always knows the history around it. He understands the foundation and how it connects to other parts of the Scripture. And then he takes it and transposes it into a historical setting and can have a conversation there. So it's a deep knowledge. It's the rivers of living water that are found in a canyon.
I want to tell you one thing that I will never forget. I can forget my kids' names. I can forget important things like how far I hit my sand wedge. I can forget all the important things, and I will never forget. I may know the questions, but I don't live the answers the way he does. When we were freshmen, somebody wrote something terrible about him in a blog back home. It was more than terrible. It was defamatory. It was actionable. And back then, I didn't know you didn't go rush up to your colleagues and say, hey, did you read that terrible story they wrote about you? I now know you don't do that, but at the time, we didn't know that. So I go into his office. He's in Longworth. I'm in Longworth. I go into his office. I buzz right past his receptionist. And I said, Tim, did you read this? We got to do something about it. I'm sick of it. I'm just sick of it. We're not going to sit here and be a pinata. What this person wrote is despicable. It is libelous. We're going to do something about it. And he said, all right, come on in my office, close the door. And I thought, good. Finally, Mr. Christian's going to be a little tougher. So I closed the door, and he says, we're going to pray for it. And I looked him right dead in the eye with the Lord as my witness. I looked him right dead in the eye, and I said, Tim, you can pray for him. I'm not going to. And he said, will you sit with me while I do? And I sat there and listened to him pray for someone who had written something libelous, scandalous, inaccurate about him. And I sat there furious, even though I wasn't the victim. And he sat there and did exactly what the Scripture tells you to do. So you're right. I may know the question, but I don't live the answer, not the way he does.
I'm a very flawed individual. The
only flaw you had that day is you didn't help me come up with a way to get that person back.
I need all the grace I can get. Absolutely. The only grace.
So, Senator, one of the things you said in your book, you said, if we're going to change the world, it will happen through friendship.
Yes.
It will happen as each of us enlarges our comfort zone to make room for unlikely friendships with people with whom we may have little in common. And I think for most of us, that sounds great in theory.
Yes.
But life is full. There are obligations and other relationships and duties that pull at us from all quarters. So what advice would you give to people who genuinely would like to do this in theory and perhaps struggle to make it happen in practice?
Well, one of my Senate colleagues, James Langford, was a youth pastor in Oklahoma for a very long time, had a couple 100,000 youngsters go through his youth camps. And he and I have been friends for a while, and he came up with a concept that I co-sponsored called Solution Sunday. Getting people who are not like each other to sit down at a table, typically in your home, and break bread and have a conversation about what you have in common. Too often, as Trey has said, we run to conflict. We want to be in a position of talking about those things that are different, which would be contrasts, but we run to conflict. What we hope to accomplish through Solution Sundays is having a safe place in an environment that you would not normally have that conversation with someone who's not like you. And it works fabulously. Another way to do it is to simply put yourself in the other person's shoes and find a project to work on together. Habitat for Humanity is a wonderful place to learn a lot about yourself and your construction skills, which I have none. But it's a great place it's as good as breaking bread. Trey has, in a powerful way, entered into the shoes of a father whose daughter was murdered and brought about a transformation in a person in a way that I could never articulate or understand, but it's in the book. It's an amazing story. Would you mind sharing that? Because I do think that that is perhaps the best example of the power of hope transforming a life that could be filled with bitterness and unforgiveness forever. But because of what you did, it changed someone's life.
I think you put your finger on it, which is try to put yourself in the shoes of someone else. I had a man named Eddie All. His daughter, he had a beautiful, beautiful 19-year-old daughter named Miranda that was tragically killed. And when I was a DA, I would meet with the parents in homicide cases, and he came in and he didn't even sit down, wouldn't even sit down. Said there's no way a white man is going to understand or value a young black female's life. He wasn't ugly about it. He was resolute. So it made me sit there and think, okay, how does the justice system value life? It'll be a tough case. Do I take a plea? Do I value her life at 10 years? Would I value it the same way I would the principal at the local high school's kid? So as you might imagine, I decided I was going to take that case for myself and prove him wrong. And we went to trial, and at the conclusion of the trial, the same man that said there's no way, wouldn't even sit down in my office, no way I could value his daughter's life. I think he watched a white guy try as best he could to put himself in the shoes of a man who had just lost his daughter. So he hugged me after the trial. He's hugged me every time I've seen him since out in Spartanburg. And I went on a plant tour, I guess about 1.5 years ago, and I'm at some concrete plant in Greenville. And this worker comes up to me and says, "You and I have a mutual friend." And I thought, oh, dear Lord. Trying to keep that a secret. Be real quiet. My chief of staff's over here before you say who it is. He said, "Eddie All." So we go from "I'm not even going to sit down in your office" to Eddie is apparently telling people, and admitting that you're friends with a U.S. congressman takes a lot this day and age. So for him to be able to do that, when Timmy was talking, I thought, I just left a restaurant that he and I eat at almost every night we're in Washington. We know tons of details about the lives of the men and women who not just wait on the tables, but the cooks. Johnny Ratcliffe and I were in the back tonight watching the cook make a certain dish. So you got a congressman from Texas, a U.S. senator, that are on a first-name basis with a cook at a restaurant. Are you intentional about it? Whenever life puts you in it, now you gotta be careful not to judge. You don't have any idea how much you have in common with someone, and you can't tell it from a book's cover. But if you are, whether it is the lady that takes the money at the gas station where I fill up, if you will just treat people with kindness and look them in the eye and just act like you're remotely interested in their lives, it does not take much to start. I'm not talking about naming your kids after one another. I'm just talking about giving each other the benefit of the doubt. You know, my daughter is to the left of Chairman Mao. Politically, she just is. And so is every one of her friends. But if you say something bad about me on Facebook, even if it's true, they will defend me, even though there's not another Republican they would ever vote for. Because they think well, I know him, and he's wrong, but he's well-intentioned. Take the time, give them the benefit of the doubt, see what you have in common. I mean, politics is the most divisive thing, particularly now. So, I mean, we start with sports, you know, which we're both Cowboys fans, so some people, that is divisive. We pull for the same team God pulls for. Just start with something, but the word I use is intentional. Just be intentional in your desire to reach out to someone that would be surprised that you did so, either because of their station in life or a religious difference or a racial difference. I think about 80% of us have about 80% of life in common. It's just accepting it and then being intentional about identifying that. Again, you're not asking them to marry you. You're just trying to start a friendship.
One of the things that Trey, his idea, unfortunately, I wish it was mine, but it was really his. After the challenges that we had in South Carolina, we put together a group of pastors and African-American leaders and law enforcement officers to start having a conversation. Now, he's a congressman for Greenville and Spartanburg, but he would travel the entire state, and he's retiring, so he's not running for anything. So he traveled the entire state to listen to people who he has no reason to listen to, except for he believes that somehow it may make our state healthier. That's why I think it starts with love. That's why I think it starts with checking out 1 Corinthians and taking a perusal through the 13th chapter and understanding, appreciating, if we distill the component parts down, you do find a path forward. It has to be intentional, and it will be uncomfortable. But the longer you do it, the more comfortable it becomes, and the more you want to add to it.
It's been suggested that our mobility and our rootlessness is one of the major contributors to the decline of friendship in the country. It's harder to sustain friendships when you're not in the same place. And you both are about to enter a new chapter. Congressman Gowdy, you're retiring, and it seems unlikely that you'll be able to continue to have dinner together 5 times a week at the same restaurant where you know everybody.
You didn't tell me that part. Thank you very much.
Have you thought about what is next for your friendship and ways you're going to sustain it across geographic distance?
Well, I mean, quite honestly, our friendship's to the point now where if a day goes by that we have not communicated, he likes emojis. I'd rather have, I can't figure what all of them mean, by the way.
Hogwash. Excuse me. Hogwash. Excuse me.
We text a lot. We talk. I will be in D.C. some. The law firm has a D.C. office. He obviously is going to be my senator, so he'll be. But this is the best way I can tell you that our relationship will never change. I recently updated what I would like to happen when my wife puts a DNR order on my chest when I'm taking a nap and I'm not resuscitated. It is just a nap, honey. Don't lay a DNR order on my chest. I want him to preach my funeral, which means he's going to have to, for 2 reasons. Number one, he's really, really good, and he's great at leaving out the bad stuff. So I watched him preach his grandfather's funeral, and it was amazing. It's hard. I mean, he loved his grandfather, but he was better than any paid preacher I've seen. So he's going to have to stay involved in my life because it's my dying wish that you take about 3 hours to try to, all right, 2 hours to do my funeral.
God said.
We teach a class together. I think hopefully, the Lord willing, he is going to write a book about his life. And I tell everyone I am out of politics unless Tim Scott runs for president. And then I will come back and knock on whatever doors, preferably in some high-end neighborhoods. I'll knock on whatever doors in Iowa he wants me to knock on.
I do think that we have a couple of projects that will keep us moving forward. I think teaching a class together, we taught at Clemson University, Go Tigers.
Finding you a wife is a project, too.
Let us pray. I've been reading Proverbs 18:22 for a long time. He just didn't give me a timeline. I do think that teaching class together will be helpful. Writing a couple books, hopefully in the future, will be helpful. But God has done something that is permanent with our friendship. And I love when Trey sends me, you know, the black praying hand from the white dude from Spartanburg. or the darkest black fist he could find. So I might like emojis. He's got a sense of humor.
In Christ, there is no male, no female, no Jew, no Gentile,
Colossians
no black,
3,
no white.
yeah,
So I can
I
send
hear
whatever
that.
color fist I want to send.
I like, and he's got one that has an afro as well, which is really interesting.
I hadn't gone that hairstyle yet, but it's on the list. It's coming.
We're going to turn now to what's always the most dynamic and interesting part of our evening conversation, which is hearing from you. And those of you who have been to evening conversations before know that we have 3 guidelines for questions. We ask all of you to keep your questions brief, keep them civil, and keep all questions in the form of a question. So we have 2 volunteers with microphones. Please wait till the microphone comes to you in order to speak. If you could identify yourself as well. And I'm going to stand up so I can see you and call on you. But questions for the congressman or the senator? Right there.
Hi, my name is Daniel Turner. I'm from Columbia, South Carolina. First, I just want to thank you both for how well you represent our state.
Thank you.
My question is about the role of the church in developing this unity you've spoken about. It's often said that Sunday mornings are the most segregated time of the day. What role have you seen the church play in developing this unity, and what do you want to see moving forward?
Yeah, that's a unfortunate fact that still persists. You can blame that on style of worship and a lot of things, but some of it's just our inability to want to change. So we have some challenges to do within the church, but the church is, in fact, the only hope for real reconciliation and unity. I think it's the 2 Chronicles 7:14 that talks about a remnant of people, if my people, not the entire nation, not the average person, not the person who attends church, but if my people, people who have this passion that beats in their heart for each other because they have experienced a grace and a forgiveness that blows them away, that gives them this yearning for love and to share it with others. That power germinates in people and draws us together. And the only place that I see that it actually happens consistently is the church. I happen to go to a church that is a fairly large church in South Carolina, a place called Seacoast, and we have multiple campuses. We have diversity that goes from 90-10 at one campus to 50-50 at another campus. So it's a work in progress, but my pastor happens to be my mentor, and he always tells me that I have the right to be wrong, which is an interesting concept for him too, but for me as well. Just joking, Greg. I'm sorry, I forgot this is being recorded. Just a kid, joking. So the church will be the bridge that brings us together, and in the end, I'm sure that Adam and Eve is where it started, and so we're all related. We just have to realize it.
I would just say you can't think of a barrier that Christ didn't break down. So if you call yourself a believer, just look at the parable, not the parable, the story of the woman at the well. I mean, there are half dozen barriers. Timmy mentioned that verse, if my people who call themselves by my, is that right? If my people who call themselves by my name.
Absolutely.
He did not say if Congress would only be in session more, if only the Senate would do away with its 60-vote rule, if only the Supreme Court would take certiorari on something. If my people. So if you're waiting on government to lead this, you will be disappointed, and you should not. If you're a believer, you should not wait. You purport to believe in the most unifying, equalizing person who's ever lived, so you shouldn't wait on government.
Other questions? Way there in the back.
Hey y'all, thanks for coming. My name is John Allen Riggins. Just started a career, just graduated law school, starting a career in the legal profession.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So, thinking about when de Tocqueville came, he saw such value in the legal community. And now I think for most people, it seems like lawyers are more of hired guns. So I'd be interested in kind of this conflict between law being a adversarial process and this goal of reconciliation, the law as a method of reconciliation. Representative Gowdy, what you think as someone inside the legal profession and Senator Scott, more importantly, as someone outside the legal profession?
Well, to me, the purpose of the justice system is just that. It is a just result. We call it a verdict, which means to speak the truth. We've chosen to go at that with an adversarial system. We could have chosen other things. There are other countries that have other ways of getting at it, but we use examination and cross-examination, and then we trust our fellow citizens to speak the truth. So while, yes, I never viewed myself as a prosecutor my goal was not to get a conviction. My goal was to present the state's case and do it in a way that inspired public confidence, even if that meant losing the case. Keep in mind, prosecutors dismiss almost half the cases that come into their office. I don't care who the best criminal defense attorney you can think of, Abby Lowell, whoever you want to think about, he ain't cleared 50% of the cases he's gotten. So a prosecutor's job is to really to be a minister of justice, and I believe that the whole time I was one. Look, there's more civility in a death penalty case, of which I've done more than a half a dozen, than there is in a congressional committee hearing. So if you're worried about the real lack of civility, don't run for Congress. Go do death penalty cases. You would think the stakes would be pretty high in a capital case, and they are. But there's more civility, more fairness, more not characterizing the motives of the other side. I mean, it's sad, but it's true. There is more civility in a capital case than there is in the modern political system. So keep on doing your law, just don't go into politics would be my advice to you.
You said John Riggins? Are you related to John Riggins? Yeah, there's time. So for me, if you think about de Tocqueville's visit to America in the 1800s, one of the things that was his conclusion was that the greatness of our nation wasn't found in all the institutions that we would name naturally and instinctively, but it was found in our houses of worship. And so if you think about who we are as a nation, the Judeo-Christian foundation seems to have permeated in such a way that our legal system was designed around the Ten Commandments. And so as an outsider looking in, I have great confidence in our legal system and its ability to become more perfect. I think of Frederick Douglass early on fighting for my freedom by not throwing the Constitution out, but asking our nation to live up to the vast majority of what was in the Constitution. Of course, not the 3/5 of a man. But the fact is that what has really helped to create the greatest nation on earth is this notion that we have to live under the rule of law, which means that the poorest and the weakest person who has something gets to keep it, which is not the nature of man. And so our legal system is framed in such a way that in America, the poorest person, the weakest person, the person who is the outlier has just as much success and just as many rights in the legal system than does the richest person. Now, we are not perfect because it's the human beings within the system that is the fly in the ointment, but our legal system itself is in fact a system that is becoming more perfect because the men and women of this nation are demanding more perfection or for us to live closer to the conviction that we had when it was written, if that makes sense.
Other questions? We'll go over here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Senator Representative. My name is Hannah Wardell. I'm a Capitol Hill staffer who barely finds time for essential friendships, so I really admire your priority of it. But I wonder, in a society and an institution like Congress that prioritizes outputs and productivity over relationships, are there institutional changes that need to happen to make it a more hospitable place for friendship?
Redistricting. You know, I was talking to a former member a couple of days ago who was lamenting the fact that we all go home on the weekends. And, you know, children are unifying. If they're in a school play, whether you're Republican, Democrat, or Bull Moose, you want the play to end, so you're not stuck there all night long. I didn't say that, did I? You want everybody to do well in the play. So the fact that we're all, you know, I mean, you can blame the commercial airline. We all do go home, but the reality is, again, that's reflective of the people who sent us. If I were to have told people in South Carolina, hey, I'm gonna move to Washington, I would have been retired 6 years ago. That's not what they want. We're in the gym. The gym is the most unifying place. But I gotta tell you, unless you're in leadership and you're just expected to not get along, the overwhelming majority of us have very good relationships with each other. And that is true when you are having a terrible day, you look at your phone and see who is offering you words of encouragement. So it's not the member to member, it's the fact that we don't feel comfortable saying it publicly, which again reflects more on the people we work for than it does on us. The fact that I got to sit there and think, do I want to dime Tulsi out for sending me a very kind text when I left? I shouldn't even have to think about that. But I did the first time I said it. Now it's out. But Peter Welch? Do you know Peter? Very progressive guy from Vermont. That's who had my going away party. He had him there, he had Joey there, he had Radcliffe. He knew who my friends were. You come to a dinner at State of the Union night, it's half Republicans, it's half Democrats. We just don't feel comfortable saying it. It's not being recorded, is it? We don't feel comfortable saying it publicly.
I love the bosses back at home, by the way.
Well, yeah, you can tell which one's still staying in the game.
I said that sincerely, by the way.
He meant it. I did too, though.
I think on Capitol, you didn't mean what you said. I think that's probably true and funny. So on Capitol Hill, one of the challenges I think is this is unfortunately a dog-eat-dog world called DC. To move forward, you are oftentimes willing to push your so-called friends to the side and climb over their bodies to get to the next rung on the ladder. And I see that happen whether it's members or staff. The one thing that we've done, not because of me, my chief of staff has done a really good job of trying to create a culture in the office that is more like a family, that is driven by strong relationships and not transactional relationships, which allows for a true bond to grow. I think the same is true in Trey's office. I find it very interesting that on the weekends that my staff will send me a shot of 4 or 5 of them going to church together, or 3 or 4 of them hanging out watching the Clemson Tigers hopefully lose to the Carolina Gamecocks, which we've hoped for the same thing.
That'll get you in more trouble back home than anything I said.
And on the front row too, by the way. I saw the big Clemson Tiger paw there, so I had to say something. Alan knows, though, yes. But they'll do fun things together. And what I think is interesting is that very, very often that they'll have folks from other offices coming by our office for our Thanksgiving potluck or our Christmas dinner tomorrow night. Trey will come and others will come as well. So you have to be intentional about creating a culture somewhere. Fortunately, I can do that in my entire office. We have to learn how to do that if we want real friendships to actually grow. Because you can't force it, right? You've got to be in a place where you're spending enough time with the person that it starts making a difference in your life, and then you opt to sacrifice something else to spend time with them. It is hard for us to do dinner every night that we're in town together. Sometimes we have to do it at a fundraiser. Sometimes we have to do it before the fundraiser or after an event like this. It takes intentionality for us to plan our schedules in advance. But it only happens because we've spent enough time together growing that friendship. It would not have happened in our first year in Congress. But find people who have passion like you have if you want to create a culture in this city where you have a chance to see real friendships grow.
We're going to take one more question. The gentleman in the back there.
Good evening. My name is Stanley Moore. I live right here in Washington, D.C.
Hey, Sam.
My question deals with pride and humility. So often, both of you are so humble and speak so well of each other, compliment one another. I want you both to speak. Was there a time earlier in life where maybe you leaned more on pride and really hurt a valuable relationship?
I'll take that one. Unfortunately, for me, the answer is yes. I remember it was, this happened several times. I'm just going to give you the clearest example that I have. I was on it was probably 15 years ago, maybe longer. I was on a national TV show for the first time and came back home. And my pastor, was excited for me as well. So he said, we had, I think I was a councilman at the time, County Councilman Tim Scott was on national TV, and he stood me up in church, and they all applauded, and my chest got bigger, and my head got bigger. One of the reasons why our Senate pins, by the way, are so small comparatively speaking to the House pin, our egos are much bigger. So just remember that. And so I was filled with some pride. James 4:10 I had not read yet, by the way, and started acting in a way that was not in my best interest or the best interest of my friends. I wanted to talk about my show incessantly. And I heard this voice in church the next Sunday where the good Lord said to me, you do real well on the stage. Can you serve me when no one's watching? And my obvious answer was, of course I can, God. And then the next thing I knew, I was instructed to start, by the good Lord, I think, to clean the church bathroom. And at that time we had 3,000 or 4,000 members. And I knew it was, I said, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. And several hours later, having cleaned enough stalls to realize that men need to step closer. Golly. Seriously, please help the brother out. Just step on up one more time. I walked away with realizing how much and how quickly pride can consume and then destroy the vessel that it's in. And it took me having to wrestle with that conversation, and a couple of friends poking me in the side, telling me to get it together. And then that final word from the Lord that helped me in a 7-day period come back to earth and try to anchor myself to it. But that could have been a trail for years, and I wouldn't have him sitting on this stage.
That's the last prideful thing you've ever done or thought, I can tell you that. The whole time I've known you, I've never seen a glimpse of it. When you look at the spiritual gifts, I think the only one I've got is discernment, and that is best applied to yourself. So I talked to Mary Langston and everyone that works with me about self-awareness, and so you better practice it. And if you do have self-awareness and you are motivated by a fear of failure and not a desire for success, then you don't really fight pride, because it means you're constantly aware of where you're not good and you're constantly fearful of failing. I think the people who struggle with pride the most are the ones who are motivated by a desire for success. If I were to watch one of my interviews on television, I would be nitpicking what I did wrong and how I could do better the next time and how ridiculous that comment was. I would not have time to think, gosh, I've got 1,000 weaknesses. My wife will be happy to give them to you in whatever order you want. But pride just would not be one of them, because if you have self-awareness, which I would encourage everyone to develop, then you should be most acutely aware of your own deficiencies. And that would be a great defense to pride, to know where you're not very good and need to get better.
Senator, Congressman, thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Well done, Renee. Well done.
We want to commend to you their book, Unified, How Our Unlikely Friendship Gives Us Hope for a Divided Country. It is for sale. We have just a few copies, which are going to be for sale for $25 right over there on the book table. We hope that you will avail yourself of that opportunity. We also want to commend to you, in addition to reading their book, reading the invitation that should be on each of your seats, which is to join the Trinity Forum Society. The Trinity Forum Society is a community of like-minded or open-minded fellow travelers who want to grapple with the big questions of life in the context of faith. It helps support programs such as this, not only here in Washington, D.C., but really around the country. It is a vital part of making these kind of programs and these kind of discussions and this very unique space to grapple with those questions possible. So we would really encourage you to consider that invitation and to join. To sweeten the pot a little bit further, we do have special incentives to join tonight, which is the first 10 people who join the Trinity Forum Society will get a previously signed copy of Senator Scott and Congressman Gowdy's book. I'm not sure whether the others are signed or not, but you can guarantee that you will get a signed copy by joining the Trinity Forum Society tonight. This is just one of many benefits of being part of the society. In addition to discounted registration for events such as this, you all also receive our quarterly readings where we try to take the best of literature and letters, add an introduction explaining context and background, discussion questions in the back so that it is a book club in a bag, as well as our daily What We're Reading curated list of reading recommendations and our monthly podcasts and the like. You also help support these programs and make this possible not only here, but for many others around the country. If you'd like to share this event tonight, we'll have photos on Facebook and encourage you to tag your friends to share that and the video. And if you would like to help sponsor other conversations like this, we would love to talk with you. My colleague, Colleen O'Malley-Horrocks, if you can stand so people can see you, this is the best person to talk with about sponsoring other programs such as this. Yes, I think a round of applause is in order there. And if my other colleagues, Alyssa Abraham and Becca Noyes, could stand and wave, these are the people to talk to about joining the Trinity Forum Society, and I understand you will be right in the back at the table where they can take your registrations there. We also hope that you will join us for future evening conversations. This is actually our last evening conversation of the year. We'll be releasing a part of our 2019 roster very soon, so stay tuned. We hope you will join us for those. Our final reading group of the year will be taking place next week on December 17th. We'll be discussing Dorothy Day's The Long Loneliness with an introduction by Ann Brooks and David Brooks, and encourage you to sign up for that. The reading group is free, but registration is required. Finally, as we wrap up, it is always appropriate to end with thanks, and there are many people that we are thankful for tonight, including our sponsor and co-host, the Pepperdine School of Public Policy, led by its very able dean, Pete Peterson, whose vision and support have made this evening possible. I'd also just like to thank the staff of our speakers for their work in making tonight possible. I know we were joined by Joe McKeon from Senator Scott's office and Mary Langston Willis in Congressman Gowdy's office. We were so glad to have them join us, as well as our volunteers who have labored humbly in the background to help us put on this event tonight. Elise Amez-Draws, Amanda Kwok, Timothy Wolf, and Matthew McKnight, thank you so much for your work tonight. Thanks also to our ever-stellar photographer, Clay Blackmore, and to my fantastic colleagues, Colleen Horrocks, Alyssa Abraham Kroboth, and Becca Noyes. Thank you again to our recently departed speakers tonight, Senator Scott and Congressman Gowdy, and finally to each of you for your presence and participation tonight. Thank you and good night.